Hello everyone, my name is Chris and this is Marshall's Musings. I'm going to muse about things. So the first book that I've read recently that I'd like to talk about is a book by John Herman Randal Jr. and the title is How Philosophy Uses Its Past. I bought this from a shop in Hale Y, the book town. I'm afraid I do not remember what the shop is called, but it has a downstairs section, and the philosophy and the theology section downstairs is really good. It's so how philosophy uses its past. Now this book explores it was published decades ago, so the argument may have changed, but at the time what John Herman Randal Jr. was saying was that the history of philosophy compared to philosophy itself was quite unappreciated, in the sense that the ideas were important, but the context, the narrative, the flow of ideas wasn't as focused. So we had a wonderful narrative, like a historical narrative, that just wasn't taken into account. It was like sections of the age of philosophy, like we're going to say, and the philosophy of antiquity, the medieval philosophy, and modern philosophy. And we'll just, the argument is, we'll just take, like, say, Socrates, and then Thomas Aquinas, and then Descartes, and then we'll just take certain philosophers from those eras and then just cherry pick them and focus on the philosophy, but not the narrative of how philosophy came about. So there's no music, there's no flow, there's no narrative. And what this book does is make, a narrative in an introductory sense. It's only about 100 pages long. And what he's doing is giving you like just a short history of philosophy and how ideas began and how they flowed and how things interconnect and things like that. Because there's a great story to tell. It's not just the ideas, it's the way these ideas come to us, It's not just X said this, it's in this time period X said this, which contextually, has us bridged to now, why we still say this today. Do you know what I mean? It won't just be like, well, this is the idea in philosophy because Socrates said it, so that's how it is. It's like, no, it tells you kind of like why it held up, why, who kept the ideas, why the ideas. That's my interpretation of it. Okay, I'm quite a spiritual being, and I look at things very much in a like Hegelian, like optimistic, like everything, like the history has a narrative to it and like a beautiful story that's gonna unfold. And I like to see things in the sense that one day it's all gonna make sense. And books like this, history is so important, and we need to, with the history of philosophy may be about ideas, and it may be, we may just focus on who said what, but we want to know when and where and why they said these things, and like the cultural context. It's like I'm giving the book more depth in terms of things like that, because obviously it is just like basically a narrative of philosopher in this era, philosopher in this era, philosopher this era. But if you're taking it like, if you expand upon it, then you really can make an epic, great story with your imagination of like the timeline of ideas. You can really romanticize it. And yeah, I would definitely recommend this. I think it was written as lectures and then the lectures were like transcribed into this book. And he's got a good wit to him. It's quite a funny book. It's got a sense of humour to it. It's not dry at all. It's not extremely academic, you know. And yeah, definitely I'd recommend it for. Next book I read was, and I got this from White also on the same trip, is The Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov. And before this, I read The Master and Margarita, and I did not like it. The story is about a dog, and he's just roaming the streets, and he's adopted by a doctor, and this doctor lives in a shed, house flat kind of vibe, and he has a doctor's office there. And this doctor, he experiments on this stray dog, this homeless dog that's starving and hungry, and he gives him a brain transplant and gives him a pair of human testicles, I'm pretty sure. And the dog is roaming about, causing chaos, and he gets communist ideas because communists have moved into the house and they own the place, I'm pretty sure. And he causes terror, and it's very much like a commentary, the story on what was happening at Russia at the time. Bulgakov, he wasn't published in his lifetime for his other books, but I think this one was published, and he was very much against the Stalinism and stuff like that. He complained about it often, and then he actually contacted Stalin and was like, listen, I need help, I don't have any work. And then Stalin actually called him up in a very surreal moment and gave him an office, like a job in office, and he worked there, but he wasn't published in his life until later on. But I think this one was actually published in his life, and it's talking about what was happening in Russia at the time. And this dog is he represents the common working man, and he's a ruckus. And the doctor who does the experiment on him, he is the upper class. He is the old Russia, and it's very funny. I definitely recommend it. It's a great book. The next book I want to speak about is The Collected Schizophrenias by Esmé, Weijun, Wang. I'll be honest with you, the reason I bought this was because of the Van Gogh painting on the cover. I was like, I absolutely love that. Like, it's a book about schizophrenia, it's got this. That's really cool. She suffers from schizophrenia, and it's a narrative of her diagnoses throughout the decades, because it took her time to have the diagnoses of schizophrenia. It's definitely about her frustration. This woman's in pain, she's hurting, because of the schizophrenia. Like, it ruins her life in a lot of ways. She has to deal with like being in relationships and her family dynamics, and at one point through I kind of near the end of the book, she starts talking about the possibility of having kids, and she feels quite like negative towards having children because she doesn't want to pass on what she feels like, which is basically a family curse of schizophrenia because of its hereditariness. It's really good. It's really interesting. I was sad most of the time reading it, honestly. I just felt really awful for her, and she's obviously a talented woman, and she's creative, and she seems interesting and vibrant, and she just doesn't get the help that she needs, and it doesn't seem as though she's taken very seriously, and it's just awful. And yeah, this book, it made me angry, to be honest, dude. I really felt for Miss Wang, I really didn't like the way she's been treated at all. No, absolutely not. But yeah, definitely read this book. Please look up mental illness, because it's a very real thing that people experience, and it's good to be aware of it. Next book. Martin Goodman, not the guy from Friday Night Dinner. A History of Judaism. Until the collapse of the temple by the Romans in the mid to late ADs, we are getting kind of like a meta narration where Martin Goodman is talking through Josephus, who was a Jewish philosopher, scholar, and he was also a part of the rebellion against Rome in Israel back in that time in Jerusalem. And then throughout that, post that, it's much more of Martin Goodman's, just his voice, because obviously Josephus died eventually, so the story progresses through just Martin Goodman, where we go back and forth, to Josephus is quoted a lot. I'm Philo/Philo, Philo, and it's mostly those two voices we get along with Martin Goodman through the story. And we start with early Judaism, the spoken tradition of the Torah and early ideas and Israel's relationship to the Mesopotamians and the Babylonians. A big history of Israel. It's a history of Judaism. It's the history of the Jewish people, and it's a great show of the great historical recordings and heritage of the Jewish people and of Judaism. That it's such a rich book, and there's so many different sects of Judaism that it focuses on, and you get the Pharisees and you get the rabbis, and the narrative of how the philosophy / the theology of Judaism progressed through the eras. And yeah, it was great. I really, really enjoyed it. I like that post medieval times the narrative becomes it focuses on Kabbalah, and it talks about different false prophets and false messiahs, and it speaks about how the constant migration of the Jewish people throughout the Middle East and Europe, they get kicked out of Spain, they go to Amsterdam, and just the around that circle journey of the Jewish people, and how they the Sephardic Jews, and how they're different to the Israeli Jews and the Egyptian Jews, etc., and the different cultures and different outlooks on life. And yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. There's a lot of illustrations within the book as well. It'd be more lenient towards different parts of Judaism, or the merging of cultures. Here we have a synagogue in Galilee, and it has the zodiac, and obviously as pagan ideals, but it's mixed in with Judaism, so you get a great cosmopolitan story of how Judaism came about with the rest of the world, and it wasn't just stuck in one place. It did evolve and it did change. Like I said, it went from the Pharisees to later on the rabbinic Judaism, which is still kind of the Judaism that we have today, compared to the more ancient forms of Judaism, which were much more literal readings of the Torah, or the more lenient hippie kind of movements and stuff like that. And yeah, it's just a great cultural history, and also a history of a people and how they have progressed throughout history. Didn't really focus on subjects it was more about the culture, so it didn't really focus on things like the more crazy modern day issues of Israel today, what's going on there. It wasn't political in that sense. It was much more an older focus of the past, basically, of Judaism, and not at all modern day Israel. If you think it's going to be like that, it's not. It's much more a history of the practice, but it just happens to also be a story of the people. I hope that makes sense. Definitely recommend this one. Really good. I'm going to talk about two books that I'm currently reading. Number one, we'll go with the fiction I'm currently reading. Riders of the Purple Sage by Zane Grey. Cool Western story. I think it was first published in 1912. There's a couple of film adaptations of it. It's set in Utah. It's about a Mormon community. And the main woman, her name is Jane. And she has inherited this Utah town. It's a Mormon town. She inherited the town from her father. He basically built the place, and she has all her Mormon workmen there. And they obviously, it's set in the West, and they're Mormons, so they don't have really the greatest opinions towards women because they're obviously not very respectful of her authority in the town. Like, she has a friend called Vendors, and he's a Gentile, and they don't like that. And they think that their authority on that is more important than hers because she's a woman. That's why. It's because she's a woman. And they're sexist because men. And it's great. It's a cool story. Strange man comes into town, shows his face. I'm still reading this, so I don't know what happens next, but he shows up and he asks for a grave of a woman that Jane knew. We don't know the reason why he's come to the town to see this grave. We don't know what his relationship to this woman was, if he's like a bounty hunter, finding out how she died, or if it's her brother or husband, things like that. But the part that I'm currently on was a really beautiful part where Vendors, Jane's male friend, I don't know if they're lovers or not, but they're friends. He's Gentile, and he goes out to the Purple Sage, and he's on his horse, a horse that he's borrowed, because what's happened is that the cattle herd has been stolen by a infamous band of bandits, and he's gone out to investigate what's going on because they're in a canyon. And he goes down and explores this, and there's a really beautiful part where he is going down into this canyon on the sun setting, and for the first time in his life he feels a sense of purpose because he misses home and he doesn't really know what to do with his life, and he's on this quest to figure out and find these bandits. And he's for the first time getting a sense of purpose and sense of the bigger picture in life, and he's becoming one with nature. And it's awesome. It's really well done. And the part that I'm currently on now is that there's in this infamous group of bandits there is a masked rider, and Vendors shoots this rider, and then he's like, "Oh, I've hit the jackpot. I've discovered and shot and seemingly killed this infamous bandit." And then he unveils the mask, and it turns out to be a woman. And now his mission of, I've done this, I've done something in my life, it's turned upside down because he's seemingly shot an unarmed innocent woman. We don't know about her yet. She's been shot, she's kind of unconscious, in and out, but he's not very happy about it because he thinks that he's basically killed an innocent person who's maybe been hijacked or something like that, or had Stockholm syndrome from the gang, but we shall see how that works out. And then finally, the last current book that I'm reading is St. Paul by Michael Grant. Now, it's kind of a biography of Paul, but it's mostly a theological piece about the foundations of where Paul had to begin. It's about how, so St. Mary Off would say this is where Judaism was at this point, and this is where Paul disagreed, and why the philosophy and theology of Christianity went in this direction because of the disagreement, blah blah blah. So say now the more radical Jews are following the Torah by the word, and then Paul would be like, he's basically selling Christianity, remember, at this point in the early church, so he has to be like, listen, let's lay it back a bit, and you don't have to follow the Torah this bit, as long as you have faith, you know, if you are interested in these things, you already know this stuff, then it's fine, God will love you anyway. And it's basically about kind of Paul the salesman, if you want to see it in that way. But obviously, Paul's a fascinating character, and you know, he's a great sinner at first towards Christians, and then he becomes the ultimate Christian. You know, it's about his life of creating the church, basically, and it's awesome. I'm really enjoying it. I've only got about 80 pages left, something like that, and it's brilliant. I'd really, really, really recommend this one. And the part I'm currently on right now, what I just read, was the difference between mysticism and prophets, and the difference that the author was talking about is that whereas the mystical experience is the end, where you know, once you've hit the contact with the divine, that's it, that's mission complete. Whereas with the prophet, once you speak with the divine, the journey actually begins at that point, which I thought was a cool way of explaining it, because it is true, you know. It's like Paul had to see Christ first, and then his mission began. It's not like he gave up after that and was like, okay, I've achieved the highest plane, and now there's no going back to that, or he's gonna like try and reclaim that, you know, coming back with the divine. No, he's already touched it, you know. Paul says in his letters, like, over and over again, really, that, you know, Christ lives through him, you know, he's being possessed by the Spirit, like, Paul is Christ, you know, he lives through that, like, that's the mission in his life, that's his goal, you know. And what part am I currently, I'm gonna start? What the world still has to wait for. So obviously this is going to be about the establishment of what happens next, you know, because the rest of it was context as to the lead up of Paul's ideas, and I imagine this is going to be the practice. And yeah, this one is really, really, really good. Try and track it down. Like I said, if you can, please just read about Paul, because he's such an interesting dude. And that's all in terms of books I want to talk about. Those are my musings. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed, and goodbye. Take me all the way.